Doors are closing.
Public transit, that's my way to roll. On the metro, I'm taking control. Bus stops, train tracks, it's my daily grind. Public transit is the rhythm of my life.
Will the widespread, wily, and watchful Wider Won't Work community wage a war to wrestle the whopping whirlwind of TXDOT expansion into willful submission? Or will they wither, wilt, and be walloped by the whale that is the wasteland-esque plan that is I-35? Find out on this episode of Transit Tangents.
Welcome back to Transit Tangents, our fourth episode on the podcast. We've been excited to see some of the reaction to folks so far. The couple of you who've been leaving comments and everything.
The handful.
The handful, yeah.
But I can count on one hand.
Yes, and it's we truly do like it. You'll see anytime someone leaves a comment, we're like screenshotting it and sending it to each other. We're like, oh, somebody watched it, somebody listened to it. So
it's not just mom.
Yeah, if you are watching or listening, we do read the comments. Please leave some for us. And we're actually starting on this episode. At the end of the episode, we're going to kind of go through and read any of the comments that stand out to us, on, whether it be on the actual podcast themselves, if you're watching them on YouTube, or if you're listening somewhere and you can't leave a comment, any of our social media as well. We'll keep an eye on them. And we're going to start it at the end of this episode. So stick around. It's a reason to stick around to the end for that.
And if you have any stories that you want to share that you don't want to share on social media, we also have the website, transittangents.com, which has a contact page, and we'd love to hear your stories or if you have any ideas for the show.
Absolutely. Without further ado, though, today we're going to be talking about kind of an interesting topic. It's been a hot topic in Austin. I mean, kind of since I've only lived here 2.5 years or so now, but I'm sure since even long before that, everyone always hears about sitting in traffic on I-35. It's basically bad for everyone as it stands right now. There's no doubt that doing something to it needs to happen.
Every Austinite has an I-35 story, and when you first move to Austin, it's one of the first things that kind of gets ingrained into you is don't use 35 as much as you can. Don't use 35.
Just avoid it at all costs. Yeah, but got to go to this event that Rethink 35 put on, the Wider Won't Work rally. We're actually going to have some footage from that later on in the episode. I spoke to a couple folks who were attending there just to get their thoughts on it all. And it kind of sparked the idea for this episode. So to kind of kick it off, though, I think we wanted to start off with the history of I-35 in Austin on its own. Do you want to start us off there?
I do. First, I'm curious. What are your like deep opinions on I-35? What is your relationship with I-35 today?
Yeah. So specifically the second apartment I lived in Austin, I had to use I-35 more. I lived, for those of you familiar, off of East Riverside. My partner Jerry would take one of the commuter buses to work at UT that would go up I-35 every day. So I had to spend a lot more time on it if I was going north at all or even south. And most of the time you just sit in traffic of some variety. Yeah. It's rare to be going more than 35 or 40 miles an hour on it. I feel like it could be at rush hour. Obviously you're going to have traffic, but it might be Sunday at noon and you're more than likely going to be sitting in some sort of traffic on it. It's also just like very stressful road to drive on. Like the exit ramps are like really close to each other.
Really short, yeah.
And then the other experience I have with I-35 as an e-biker, which, as you know, if you've listened to any of this podcast, I've worked it into every possible part of the conversation I can.
The cult of the e-bike.
The cult of the e-bikes, yes. Crossing I-35 is also a major point that of contention, even in the areas where it's supposedly like a good place. There's a lot of issues with it. We could do an entire episode of crossing I-35. In fact, there's somebody on TikTok I noticed who is rating the crossings of I-35 on their bikes, and I'm blanking on the name right now, but I'm gonna. Hey, this is Lewis. While editing this, the person's name on TikTok is Travis Stone. Their username is @bandgeek41, so you should totally go give them a follow.
It'd be fun to see the ratings for sure.
Yeah. What about you?
I have a love-hate relationship with it. When I first moved here, I actually thought it was really cool because one of my favorite features of I-35 is we have these double decks, which we'll talk about a little bit and where those came from. So I always thought it was really neat. Like if I was driving sort of later at night and there's no traffic, which is really rare nowadays, I would just sort of like speed through those double decks, and I thought it was really cool. But I also used to live in South Austin off of William Cannon and 35. So for those familiar with the city, it is pretty far south.
Yeah.
It's only like an exit or two from the city line.
Hmm.
And I worked near the Domain, so in North Austin.
Oh
And
wow.
every morning
Wow.
I would drive from William Cannon to basically Breaker Road, and it would take me an hour and 20 minutes in the morning.
That sounds horrendous. I
It
can't
was
believe
pretty
you put
bad.
yourself through that, honestly.
It was really bad. It got better when my start time at work moved up to like 10 o'clock.
Okay.
And so then I got to get a little bit of break from
Past rush
traffic.
hour a little
Yeah.
bit. Yeah.
But then coming home, it would still take me over an hour to get home. And what I would do, not infrequently, is I would actually go to the closest train stop by the Domain and take the train to downtown to East Austin, and I'd
Mhm.
go like get happy hour with friends,
Mhm.
and then I would go back on the train to get the car, and then drive back at like 10 p.m.
That is also like the
So
most you thing ever. It's just, like kind of you like found an excuse to use the train a little bit right there, which is kind of fun.
it,
But
it was just an excuse to use the train. I could have just left work early or something probably, but so that's my relationship with I-35. I've
Yeah.
used it a lot. I'm very grateful that I live on the west side of the city now, and so we have MoPac, which we call the locals highway.
Mm.
Uh,
What's funny when I actually like got my when we were moving, part of the reason that we were moving too was like we don't have to deal with 35 anymore.
Yeah.
It made like Jerry's commute to work a lot easier, and then unfortunately, what we'll kind of get to in a second, I-35 might just be like a giant construction site for like the next decade.
It's gonna
Unfortunately,
be really painful for the next couple
yeah,
of years.
Yeah, it's not gonna be. Regardless, it's not gonna be good. But
Yeah.
yeah.
So that's my relationship with it. I love and hate it. I'm looking forward to some changes to the roadway. We'll talk about what those changes look like and what changes we sort of agree with. But yeah, the fact is, I-35 is a reality for the city. Everyone relies on it in some form or fashion, and we'll see what happens in the future with it.
Totally. What's been kind of fun to look at, though, like kind of looking back in history, is as the screen just changes away from it right now, which is pretty funny. Are some of these like really cool old images? We're not sponsored by Lazy. Actually, here's our first sponsorship: Adaptive Sleep.
Oh God.
That's hilarious. Okay. Anyway, looking at these really cool photos of what is now I-35, but back in the 1950s, and before that was just East Avenue.
Yeah.
Um,
When you look at the original grid of the city of Austin, it was bordered by West Avenue to the west,
Mhm.
obviously, East Avenue to the east, obviously. But East Avenue was this really wide, sort of grand avenue that had these huge medians in the middle that were
Mhm.
kind of park-like, and it became a gathering place for the people on that side of the city. Especially as the city started to grow, and in later years, it became really, really important for Mexican American families, African American families. We had a big Lebanese population in town, so basically all minority families in early Austin, they sort of gathered along that stretch of I-35,
Mhm.
and they would use these big medians as meeting places and marketplaces, and play games and picnics,
Yeah.
and it was actually probably a really nice amenity to the community at that time.
Right. And then as the kind of federal highway program started to occur, there were plans in all sorts of cities across the United States of where are you going to put these highways. We're going to get into this in a future episode, so we're going to kind of gloss over it for now. Obviously, this is where there's all sorts of history tied to trying to divide neighborhoods of color from
Yeah.
like more affluent parts of town. There's issues with redlining and all the like. We are going to talk about that way more in depth with somebody who's going to come on for us to kind of talk about that. So we're not just skipping it just to skip it. That is a major part of the history of I-35, but also so many highway projects across the country. But we're going to do a much more in-depth dive into that at a later date.
Yeah,
Um,
agreed.
But yeah, and I mean, eventually into the 60s, they actually start construction. If you're watching this, you're going to see a photo that looks like, I mean, it's the same.
It looks very
the-
similar to I-35 today.
Yeah, and this photo's from 1961, and it's kind of like a cement wall angling up to one of the on-ramps to I-35, and it just shows you how old some of this infrastructure really is. Again,
Yeah.
1961, this is during some of the construction of it, so I think that's an interesting thing to kind of look at.
Yeah, agreed. And the highway itself was, I think, mostly built around the 50s. And what was really unique about I-35 through Austin, Austin at the time, very sleepy, sleepy little town. I mean,
Just like today.
just like today. Nobody's
I
heard
miss
of
the
Austin.
old Austin. No.
Yeah. Oh God.
I'm just...
You've been here 5 minutes.
I know. That's,
I'm
that's
kidding.
it was just sarcastic. I miss the old. When I moved here, it was so much better here, Chris. Ugh.
For those of you who live in Austin, you know, you hear all the time the people who've been here just like 5 minutes longer than you are like, ugh, if you knew the old Austin.
Yeah. Oh, when I moved here, oh. No, okay.
But Austin was a sleepy little town. It was really just government and university town, not a huge population. So when the highway came through here, it was really kind of like the frontier of the highway system. Like it was very sleepy. So sleepy, in fact, that I-35 had one of the only railroad crossings across the highway. As in, you were driving at highway speed and the little arms would come down and you would have to slam on the brakes and stop and wait for the train to cross the interstate. Which is wild.
Correct me if I'm wrong. Is that crossing where the red line is on that crossing now, or is it a different one?
Yeah. Okay. So the one commuter train we have in Austin right now, the red line crosses under 35, but that is where the infamous I-35 railroad crossing was. As far as I'm aware, I could be wrong about it, but I'm pretty sure that's where it was.
Well, that's a fun fact.
Yeah.
Fun
so
fact.
So from the beginning, I-35 was sort of plagued with problems, and things like this railroad crossing caused a lot of congestion. We saw in the late 60s, 70s, TXDOT started to come up with a plan to fix that problem. This was the sort of early I-35 solution was to expand out like they want to do today and take over some of the land adjacent to the highway. It was too expensive back then. You couldn't quite eminent domain it all. So TXDOT had another solution, which was to go up. And what you see today as a result is they went above the railroad crossing, which is a good thing. But the highway also then splits into two decks. So you have a lower deck that goes below grade with some like street level crossings over it. And then you have these two upper decks, which kind of go up and act as originally we're supposed to act as an express lane,
right?
To go over the Cherrywood neighborhood and past UT and then into downtown.
It's an interesting setup, and for those of you not from Texas, the highways here, when I moved to Texas, I was kind of like shocked. They were very weird. So first you have like on the far out ends of it, for those of you listening, the like frontage roads is what you all call them here. And it's basically like a highway alongside a highway that has stoplights at them, and the speed limits on them are probably supposed to be 40 or 45, but everyone drives much faster than that because it's basically a highway.
I didn't know the speed limits went that low in Texas.
Yeah, basically. And then inside of these frontage roads, which have all of the kind of like entrances and exits, you then have the main part of the highway. So in this part of the highway that Chris is describing with the upper decks, you have the frontage roads on the outside, and then...
Which are 3 lanes.
3 lanes each. And then inside of that, you have the lower deck, which is 2 lanes in this area, with some kind of entrances and exits onto the frontage roads. And then above that, you have street level where there'll be crossings over for the like regular cross streets. And then above that, you have 2 more lanes in the upper deck, which is like, yeah, you mentioned express lane. At one point, I think there was probably some plan to have it continue through it. It never did. And then it just kind of like merges back in.
Yeah.
And then it turns into an even more of a cluster.
And calling it an express lane is so laughable because no one has ever taken the upper deck and said, oh, this is faster. Every time I take the upper deck, and I avoid them every single time. I used to love them because like I would take it and you could see downtown and like the university, and it's very
Capitol
scenic.
With the lovely view corridor.
Yeah, it's beautiful. And you will have plenty of time to take in the view because you're not moving on the upper decks. So I always take the lower because it's just consistently faster.
Yep.
But at the time, it was a pretty innovative highway solution. Instead of expanding out and taking over this property, you could go up and take up less space. And in that era, this was the future.
Right.
Austin was one of the first cities in the country to implement this sort of double deck solution for the interstate system. And then shortly after, we saw projects in Dallas and New Orleans and a couple other cities around the country also take this design.
And while it was innovative, you know, it's easy to look at now and be like, this is super ugly.
Yeah.
It's loud. I mean, it's like the emissions and everything coming off it like that. But that's not a part of town you want to just be like, oh yes, I live near this.
Yeah.
It's rough.
I actually have some experience with that. My cousin lived in the Cherrywood neighborhood just next to the highway, and they were a block in from the interstate. But because the double deck is so high, when the sun was setting, you could be in the kitchen and see the shadow of semi trucks on the kitchen wall.
Ah, beautiful.
Yeah, it's wonderful.
Yeah, so that's a little bit of the history
Yeah.
of what we're talking about here. And right now we're basically in the situation where the traffic is bad, the infrastructure is really old. Again, a lot of it is like 1960s. Those bridges, maybe a little bit later, 70s, were probably those double decker bridges. But we're talking a bunch of infrastructure that's like 50 plus years old. 50 being like the newer stuff.
Yeah.
At some point, there's going to need to be some sort of update to this, and in Austin, there's definitely a divide of what that looks like. Is it the plan that TXDOT, the Texas Department of Transportation, is pushing, which we're going to kind of go over first? Is it the plan that Rethink 35 wants to do, which we're going to go over right after that? Or something in between is still kind of up in the air. As of right now, TXDOT is supposed to be breaking ground on this project in 2024.
Yep.
There are likely going to be lawsuits over this. Maybe there already is one.
There's
I
a
kind of
couple.
forget. Yeah, there are lawsuits going on over this. There will likely be more. It's definitely going to be interesting. But first, let's start with TXDOT's plan here. So I'll flip this up, and for those of you listening, we'll kind of do our best to describe some of this. But these are essentially maps of like different cross sections of what the plan is going to look like. And in general, kind of one of the biggest changes here is we're getting more lanes, which is interesting because when you kind of look at any highway widening project, basically anywhere, adding more lanes might fix the problem for like the first couple months after construction. But induced demand then occurs. Rethink 35 cites this quite a bit later on, but like when they expanded the Katy Freeway in Houston, gave it more lanes, a year or 2 years later, the traffic time or your travel times actually increased by over 50%.
Yeah. TXDOT loves widening highways.
So basically, they're talking about adding one car lane to each side in the main lanes of the highway. So like kind of the main driving lanes. Now the frontage roads will mostly stay about the same size. The main lanes, they're going to add one on each side. And then on top of that, they're going to be adding 2 managed lanes, in quotes, on either side. Managed lanes being like an HOV lane, depending on where you live in the country. It's basically like express lanes, something of that nature, where you would only have certain entry and exit points so that hypothetically the traffic will continue to keep moving on that.
And at the moment, these are non-tolled managed lanes.
Right.
We'll see if it stays non-tolled, but I
Yeah.
thought that was really interesting that they weren't going to add any type of tolling.
One main thing is like these managed lanes, in my opinion, and I mean, it's basically to get people through Austin, not to Austin.
Yeah. Because what we found out in the process of research for this episode was that the American Statesman published an article that was talking about traffic through town, and it was about 80% of all trips on I-35 are actually local trips. So what we hear a lot when we talk about I-35 and the expansion and how to better manage traffic, everyone says, well, get the people who are passing through off the highway, send them to SH-130, which is this big toll road to the east of town that bypasses from like San Antonio beyond Austin. It's a very big road. Push all the traffic that way and get them out of the city. That's great, but that's 20% of the traffic. We still have 80% of the traffic to deal with. So something still has to be done in the middle of the city.
Yeah, totally. And I think we have slightly differing opinions on like what that is, and we'll get to that a little bit later on. But I think no one disagrees that like something has to change. One other element that I want to point out on TXDOT's plan, and I don't have it right in front of me here, but we'll put it up, and I know we've both seen this. Right now, the plan is that certain sections of the highway, and this is kind of like a way that TXDOT is trying to sell this to local politicians and local residents. Sections of the highway will be lowered below grade so that caps can be placed on top. So this has been successfully done in a lot of places, including Dallas is like a place in Texas.
Clyde Warren Park in Dallas. If you haven't been to Dallas to check it out, it's actually really nice.
It's also like similar. It's a little bit different style than what they did in Boston, because Boston wasn't kind of like cut and cover, but like the area around the Big Dig where they have like green space above the Route I-93 through Boston. They're trying to make it look like, yes, this is what can happen here.
Yeah, which if we take a step back, that was not TXDOT's plan or suggestion to add the caps at all. When TXDOT notified cities and said, hey, we are moving forward with this project, that's when the city of Austin said, well, this is a good opportunity. We can,
Right.
if we're going to lower the highway, we might as well
Mhm.
reconnect downtown and East Austin, which again, we're going to talk about that in the redlining episode coming up in a few weeks. But there's a huge disconnect
Right.
between the central business district of downtown Austin and the historically minority East Austin,
Mhm.
which it's always been a big scar on the landscape, and here's an opportunity to repair that scar.
Right.
So the city of Austin has sort of jumped on this. There was a lot of back and forth negotiation, I think, between the city and the state. But now, as of today, as of
Yeah.
this recording, the city of Austin has successfully lobbied TXDOT to build the foundations of this lower highway deep enough and strong enough to support upper level decks.
Mhm.
Decks that are also strong enough to support buildings up to like 2 stories tall.
Yeah, something like that.
Uh,
The caveat is that TXDOT won't pay for or build the caps. That would be on the city, and the estimates are that it would cost somewhere over $1 billion.
I think it's
Uh,
800 million is what the city's trying to raise for the caps.
Okay, so around $1 billion still.
Yeah.
Yeah.
200 million shy of a billion.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
But it is now up to the city to figure out how to pay for this, and they're moving forward with it, and they're
Right.
gonna figure out how to do this in downtown Austin to repair that landscape. We're also looking at potentially 2 other decks on I-35 to sort of hide the highway expansion.
Mhm.
One of them is at the University of Texas in Austin,
Right.
which they are gonna pay for
it
their
themselves.
own.
That's nice when
which
you
is
have
kinda
the
wild.
largest endowment because of all the oil and gas money. You can
Yeah.
pay for it. Maybe you could ask, the city could ask them to pay for the one. for the
Yeah,
city.
right.
They've got like a $50 billion endowment or something crazy like that.
But it's an awesome idea for the University of Texas too, because
Mhm.
right now the highway divides sort of this sports entertainment district where you
Mhm.
have baseball and softball and I think tennis on one side, and then on the other side you have
Mhm.
the giant
Right.
football. Was it Darrell K Stadium? Something.
I don't even know.
I don't know.
Yeah.
Go.
The caps in general
Go
like
Horns.
would be an improvement from what is there now, no
Yeah, yeah,
doubt. If the solution of like keeping a highway running through your downtown core is like the solution that you think is the right one. But
Yeah.
that's yeah.
And then there's
Um,
a third deck in the Cherrywood neighborhood, which I don't
I don't know
know
what
how
these-
it's going to get funded or where that's
right
going to
now
come
it's basically
from.
not getting funded.
I don't
Yeah.
think it's going to happen.
Yeah,
Sorry, Cherrywood.
Yeah, but again, it should, but that's okay. There's also a couple renderings. So like with this, they're also trying to sell, hey, we're gonna have much better pedestrian connectivity, biking connectivity, and that might be true in some areas. But at one point, TxDOT released this video, and I think that they thought that the response was going to be really good. And it's a crossing at I believe this is Airport Boulevard and I-35. So for those of you not from here, Airport Boulevard is like a classic strode, basically.
That doesn't go to the
Um,
airport anymore.
It doesn't go to the it's the old airport. It's a road that is like generally terrible for bikers and
Oh, yeah.
walkers. They're trying to improve it actually. And like I think when Airport Boulevard is done, it will actually be decent.
Yeah.
But this is the rendering. Chris has never seen this before. We might speed this up, so I'm curious how this is going to go. But Chris has never seen this before. I'm just curious your thoughts. I'm going to kind of talk through it. So for those listening, it's basically like at the start here, it's a pedestrian bridge with lots of artsy stuff set up. And you're crossing kind of the main lanes or crossing on a single point interchange.
I'm sorry. I like the rendering of people sitting on a bench in the middle of a
On the
highway
highway?
intersection, like
It gets-
reading the paper.
It gets better. So then this path, you have to cross 2 lanes of traffic first, and then it turns into a winding path to go underneath the road so that the car traffic isn't interfered with. It's a lot of zigzagging basically to get you through.
Famously, I hate switchbacks.
Yeah. They're clearly like thinking, oh, look at this person just sitting here under the highway.
They're sitting there
basically.
because they're exhausted from doing 50 switchbacks.
Yes. Here comes somebody biking. People just hanging out under the bridge. Again, this rendering for folks just listening has a bunch of like cartoon people kind of in the areas here. My favorite one is coming up though. And it's these like, they're showing some like nice looking gardens and art and whatnot, but they're not really paying for it. That's my favorite part. Somebody's
the
doing
guy
push-ups.
doing
There's
push-ups,
somebody
yeah.
exercising under the highway.
If you made this rendering, I need you to reach out to us so we have questions.
Yeah, if there's somebody on a wheelchair who spent a half an hour trying to like zigzag their
Yep.
way through the whole park to go sit next to the highway and talk with their friend, it's a little bit ridiculous, if I'm being honest. I appreciate the effort of like, okay, we're gonna try to make this like a nice looking place and everything, but despite like regardless of what you do to it, it's not gonna look. It's never gonna stay looking like that,
No.
unfortunately. And you're making it really inconvenient to get across. Like, you know, in a car, you're okay to like do a little bit of like zigzagging out of the way of something, because you're not
Yeah.
having to like physically walk there. This will make crossing this area much more slower and difficult for folks in a lot of cases.
No, I agree. At the end of the day, they tried to make this into this nice community gathering place, but at the end of the day, you're just sitting under a highway. Like,
Literally.
Nobody wants to sit under a highway when there's semi trucks, you know, zooming by. Well, I'll take it back. It's I-35.
Yeah.
They're not going to be zooming. You're going to have all of this car exhaust and this noise from the highway of vehicles just sitting above you.
Right.
Doesn't matter how beautiful the garden is. Nobody's
Right.
going to enjoy that.
And
I'm
not-
not going to go do push-ups next to the highway.
And also, not to mention, like, Airport Boulevard is also a major road that, like, you know, even if you weren't next to the highway, you don't want to hang out on the side of Airport Boulevard either. So
Yeah.
I thought that was kind of interesting. Now, you know, there are probably some spots where the crossings are going to get safer. I hope they would, because a lot of the crossings of I-35, as I mentioned before, are not ideal.
Yeah.
Some of them are okay, but they're not ideal in a lot of places. So
At the end of the day, though, you want if we're gonna put this below grade, which that for the most some of that wasn't below grade in this video,
Right.
but if you want to put the highway below grade, just cap it.
right.
Nobody wants to see the highway. Nobody
Right.
wants to hear the highway.
Right.
You can make the space so much nicer if you just have this nice, pleasant green space on top.
And the issue is with these frontage roads, it just like makes it so that, like, sure, you're capping the highway, great. The frontage roads are still above the cap.
Yeah.
So you're now still crossing 6 lanes of traffic going through, and there's still a highway there.
Right.
Like, it's not a great.
Well, and in
eloquent
this rendering,
solution.
I counted, I think it was 3 crossings. So you
Yeah.
still have to cross traffic like 3 times.
Right.
And wait for that traffic.
Right.
So it's still not an ideal solution at all.
Definitely not. I
Yeah.
just thought that was interesting, because I think they were expecting, like, wow, people are gonna love this. Like, look at how beautiful it looks, and then they just got this is a couple months old. They got roasted in the
I'm sure
comments,
someone liked it.
basically. Somebody probably, yeah. The contractors who were gonna get the bids to build it are gonna like that. That's a lot of hilarious
concrete.
bridges and concrete. Yeah.
Oh my god.
Yeah. So there's a whole lot you could dive into with the plans. We'll try to like make sure links and stuff are available. But yeah, it's a big expansion. This is not
Yeah.
like a small change where we're adding 1 or 2 little things. It's quite a bit.
Yeah. So I think to sum it up, TXDOT, extra lanes, that's their plan. Putting the highway below ground, but not necessarily covered with caps. And they're just going to sort of force this on the community, which, as we know, there are a lot of people in the community that are against it.
Right.
Lewis, I know you said a couple weeks ago you got to go to this rally of people who were very passionate about the interstate expansion. There we
Right.
go. At the Wider Won't Work rally.
Yeah.
Thank you for going and doing the hard work. I think while you were talking to people on the street, I was at Disney World. So
Literally. And thank you to my partner Jerry for tagging along with me. He helped out pointing the camera and all that sort of stuff.
our resident
while I interview people.
microbiologist and cameraman.
Yes. Yeah. Man of many talents.
Yeah.
Yeah. So for some context, Wider Won't Work. For some context, Rethink 35 is an organization that is pushing to, instead of sending I-35 through downtown Austin like it is currently, they want to use this opportunity to essentially reroute the highway traffic that's going around Austin to Highway 130, which Chris mentioned before, kind of goes out and around the downtown core of Austin. And they want to see the kind of downtown stretch of I-35 be converted into something like a boulevard, kind of restoring it back to like what it was at one point, except, you know, a lot of the renderings that they put out have bus lanes and bike lanes. There'd be a lot of land reclamation, so you could now have new developable land in downtown in the city core to make it a space that is still having car travel on it, but also making it a place that is friendly for bikes and walk pedestrians and all of this sort of stuff through the area.
Basically, make it a community amenity again.
Right.
Because, like we said earlier on, in early Austin, this was such a vibrant part of the community. This area of East Avenue, it was sort of a main street for so many communities in the area. And now it's just this concrete wasteland.
Right.
So if we can do anything to restore East Avenue to what it was, we should absolutely pursue that, and that is essentially their plan with
Right.
Rethink 35.
Yep, and they've kind of highlighted a lot of concerns. A lot of them we've kind of touched on before already in this interview. But if you want to learn more about their organization, we're going to keep talking about it. But rethink35.org is their website. You can kind of go see all of their plans and rationales for what they, what and why they're so passionate on this issue. But yeah, I got to go to this rally that they had. I think it was in November. It's been a little bit now, and it was really interesting. There were a lot of politicians present. We had, I think, 3 or 4 city council members spoke in support. One of our the congressmen, the U.S. congressmen who represent the area, Greg Casar, was there. The highway splits the congressional districts actually in a lot of places, which is also kind of notable.
Yeah, it's such a dividing line in Austin. You have the congressional districts on either side.
Yeah.
You have historic communities on either side.
Yep.
It is really like that seam that runs through the middle of so much of Austin politically and demographically.
Yeah, and there was a lot of like really interesting speeches that folks gave, kind of outlining a lot of the different reasons from it's not going to solve traffic to discussing the historic red line and kind of like racial inequities along with the highway. There were conversations about the environmental side of it. Among, if you live within a quarter of a mile of a highway, there's all sorts of statistics about, lung cancer and other sicknesses and illnesses just from all of the exhaust fumes and all of this sort of stuff. So kind of a wide range of different voices on this. But I was really interested to talk to folks who were actually like going and attending this rally, and kind of a fun thing that happened to us on the way. So Jerry and I rode our e-bikes there. As you do. I mean, you can't drive on the highway for going to this rally. You know what I mean? That would be a little sacrilegious. But so we're biking down, and very quickly on our ride south, we were found 2 other people on their e-bikes, and we were kind of like kept going with them. And we're like, "Are you guys going to the rally?" And they're like, "Yeah." And then we got a little bit further, and then we ran into 2 more people. And we ended up with this like little posse of 6 people. And we all rolled up on our bikes, and I have never seen so many people riding their bikes to something in my life. Like the amount of bike parking that they brought in extra stuff because they knew it was going to happen.
Yeah.
There were well over 150 bikes there, maybe. It was crazy.
The e-bike cultists are totally against highway expansion.
Yes.
That's what I'm hearing.
Yeah. And some of the people that I talked to definitely rode their bikes there. They talk about riding their bikes and everything. So it was a really cool event. I think we should just kind of move into like listening to some of those clips.
Yeah.
So we're gonna play a couple clips here, and we'll talk about them on the other side.
Sounds good.
For me, I think so much of it has to do with how long it's going to take. They're just going to like completely wreck the trail over here for like 6 years or something. And it's just like, I don't know, it's like this is where we live, and they're just like, I don't know. It's going to be miserable until they're done. And even once they are done, it's going to make traffic even worse. So
yeah, and I think we would rather see more investment into but more bike lanes and just pedestrian crossing over 35 or under 35. We live just down the street from here.
Okay.
So we love to walk and we love to bike everywhere, and it just feels like cars are more prioritized than biking and pedestrians.
So, I mean, I-35, it's like the artery of the city almost. To get anywhere, you've got to get on it. And it's already kind of nightmarish to go down, and the thought of 5 more lanes on each side, it's like maddening to even consider. And then the damage that will do to pretty much everything around it, it just doesn't seem like a good thing to happen for almost anybody.
Yeah, I think this issue encompasses a lot of different issues that we're worried about: climate change, gentrification, equity in Austin.
Coming out in person instead of digitally is it's a great way to build community with other people, really see the faces of the other people that support what you support. And also just as a lifelong Austinite, born and raised, it's just nice to come out here and be with like-minded people, just because I feel like the city is kind of becoming unrecognizable to me in some ways, and so it's nice to just be around other people who have the same values that I do, because that's kind of disappearing from the city, I guess.
So when I watch this, what I see is the community coming together, which is pretty awesome. There's a couple comments in there, like what we mentioned earlier about, well, back in my day in Austin, but I think those are valid. I really do. And one thing I like about that sort of section of videos is that it's brought up that this is really a flashpoint for a lot of different issues in Austin. Austin's a city that's growing so fast, and with that, our traffic's increasing, our environmental impact is also increasing for the worse. But it's also about zoning and gentrification and just mobility in general. So it's all of these issues really tied in to this flashpoint of this highway expansion. So it's interesting to see the people who did come out to support.
Totally. Yeah, and you got some note there of a couple bikers too. I mentioned that before. A couple of folks riding their bikes there, and really though talking about one thing that they pointed out was like car travel is like clearly the only priority.
Yeah.
And while at like the state level, if you're TXDOT, I can understand that because there aren't other ways to really get around the state. Like sure, there's Amtrak and whatever, but it's like we're talking once a day trains in places. This is not real. It's like fictional at this point. Shouldn't be, but it is. But at the city level, you know, people are recognizing like the focus is not on public transportation. The focus is not on, you know, making places more bikeable and whatnot, even though like the city is trying to do those things, but that focus really isn't there.
And I would say I'm kind of more on like the more extreme side of like literally just wanting a train to go through the city and not a highway. And I'm kind of the opinion of like rerouting people outside of the city, which I realize is almost an impossible ask in Texas or in Austin.
So you kind of support the Rethink 35 plan of like use Highway 130.
Get them out of the city and invest more in like a train, the train that we have, Cap Metro. Like that's not totally reliable and people don't use it, which I understand. But like make more stops for the train, you know, and make that easier to like access, I think, for people, rather than making the highway bigger. Yeah.
I think it's a terrible idea, frankly, because 26 lanes, like we saw how that worked in Houston with the Katy Freeway and how much traffic it created, how Houston's one of the most like traffic like ridden cities in the world, not just in the US, but also the world. And I just think, like it's a very bad idea. It's going to cause so much pollution, cause so much displacement, more so than there already is in Austin. So that's why I'm against it.
My thoughts are that there's just a lot of areas where the highway expansion kind of directly goes against different various values and things that I'm really passionate about. You know, I think as it relates to climate change and, you know, this notion of like induced demand and pushing suburbs further out and just building a form of physical architecture of our society and our city. It's just not how I would like to envision it, and I think it's really harmful to the environment. Then the impact on the community, the impact of just like cutting our community further in half. I don't know, it's like a culmination of things which I'm not all about. Yeah.
Don't like that it's going to be like taking away like all my favorite like businesses like Stars Cafe and everything else, and also like it's going to make Austin like pretty like almost uninhabitable. Like the 22 lanes is just a monster, and they've already had like proof of like what happened in Katy, Texas just not working. I just feel like it's further gonna ruin the culture of Austin, and like everyone's working so hard to preserve it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It just kind of feels like a slap in the face to people who were actually, you know, like part of this culture that's kind of dying in Austin.
Mm-hmm.
Like, you know, I kind of like grew up in, you know, like around here and just like, you know, like all these businesses that we hold so dearly, like disappearing just, you know, so we can get more lanes of traffic that like won't actually make the traffic any better. Like it just seems like really like faulty to me. Like what we actually need is like better infrastructure that like reduces the amount of cars on the road. Like that's not what this is doing. And I just, I don't know, I find it almost offensive that like people would think that this is like a good idea or that we would support it. Like real Austin does not support the expansion of I-35, period.
Yeah. And Austinites have like worked so hard for like just good public transport for like decades. And it's time.
We've been like passing money to build this fucking train like every year since the 80s. Like it's, at this point, like it just needs to get done. Like, please, you know, stop messing with Texas for real.
Stop messing with Texas for real.
And if you are, if you're not a real Austinite, if you support highway expansion, that is our good friend Hoffman.
Yes, yeah. A couple things that were brought up in this that I definitely want to point out. We haven't talked about businesses closing during this, so you know, conservative state government in Texas is famously against eminent domain.
Yeah.
Except for in this circumstance where they can build a highway wider.
Yeah, they're completely against it when it comes to the high-speed rail network we're trying to build.
Very against
But
it.
when it comes to widening a highway in the middle of the capital city,
like no questions asked.
No question.
Yeah.
And the TXDOT I-35 plan does displace over 100 businesses, homes. There's a school in there.
Yeah.
If you ride along I-35 today, you see these buildings are now starting to be abandoned.
The other thing, the one guy mentions like it goes against like all of his values basically.
Yeah.
I think that is true to Hoffman's point of like a lot of people in Austin do care about climate change, and making this highway wider, there's like no way you can square it in your head that that's good for climate change. Like you can't twist yourself in enough knots to do that, I don't think. So
and also just other environmental impacts. So right now I know the project is under a lawsuit because the environmental study for demoing the upper decks didn't really dive into the health effects for that demolition. You're releasing a lot of pollutants in the air, all of the dust for people who have air sensitivities. It's going to be really difficult for those neighborhoods to cope with this demo of the upper decks. Obviously, we don't want the upper decks. We need to demo them. But that's a big question right now on this project is, was the due diligence for the environmental study actually done correctly?
And there's a lot of conflict of interest there because we won't get into all of it, but like TXDOT basically gets to do their own environmental review.
Yeah.
Which is hilarious. That sounds fake, but it's real.
Absolutely real.
So
yeah.
One last batch of, unless you have anything else you wanted to
Well, the only thing I was going to say is it's also very clear that the Katy Freeway has a lasting impact on Texans, especially those in Austin, because as you heard in that video, it's mentioned multiple times.
Yeah.
Like the Katy Freeway is sort of the I don't like to say boogeyman in the room because like that
like
kind of sounds like it's not real, but it is very real.
But yeah, I mean the Katy Freeway is basically like it's basically the meme that you've seen before whenever they're showing like a just add one more lane, bro, or whatever it is kind of scene there. And it, definitely to your point is like a sticking point for so many people at this.
I mean, I definitely support like capping it, like either a cap and stitch program, like type of thing, or I mean, if we could get rid of it, I don't know how doable that is, especially given the current political situation.
Right.
But I think a cap and stitch right now seems like the most realistic.
Right.
Kind of similar to what Dallas did with like the park, but I think instead of park, it would be better if they made something like housing or more community spaces.
Right.
Yeah.
Awesome.
They're definitely, I like the ideas that Rethink 35 has been putting out there. I think that in general, there's this like opportunity to reroute traffic. There's all this traffic that goes north-south that bypasses the city that could just go around the city, and then there are other ways to connect our city, make it a denser city, make it a more interconnected place that has better transit. I think the bond we passed a couple of years ago is like run into a bunch of legal issues and funding issues, and we should double down our investment to improve transit so that it's easier to bike around or take public transit and take cars off the road so that people can instead focus on other ways of getting around the city.
Totally.
Just make Austin more bikeable and stuff, so then people don't have to, because I feel like you only have to drive like 5 or 10 minutes.
Yeah.
Or it's a bike ride that's like 10 minutes, and then so if you make it not bikeable, then people are just going to drive, and it's going to cause more cars and stuff. So.
And it's totally more enjoyable to bike.
Yeah.
Totally.
I think Rethink 35 has some good ideas, but like in my opinion, like I just want to like decenter like the highway from all these conversations we're having about like transport and what it should look like in Austin, because like at the end of the day, like some of my buses, they come like every hour, and it's like sometimes they get canceled and they don't come at all. Like that needs to get fixed before we start talking about like I don't know what to do with like these roads. Like I just want to decentralize cars from this like whole discussion we're having about how to make Austin more like accessible transportation wise.
I would really love to see more public transport in Austin. I think that would address a lot of the issues that are trying to be addressed.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Obviously, a couple people there mentioning public transportation needing to be fixed. A few of them actually, and one thing that I found interesting that was an argument that TXDOT was trying to make at one point in favor of their plan was that the buses could run on the managed lanes. That in in a, on paper maybe sounds good until when you look at the plans. Right now, at least, the only buses that do use 35 at all are these kind of UT system buses. They're kind of like the Metro Express, but they're like UT sponsored ones.
Yeah.
When I used to live off of Riverside, there's 3 neighborhoods over off of Riverside that have them, and they kind of run up 35. There's no place to enter in with the managed lanes to like get onto that system until after UT campus. So if they were to create some sort of like commuter buses from far south and far north, maybe. But like at one point, I think they like had Cap Metro even being like, yeah, like our buses will be able to use this, and it's like not really gonna do anything to improve bus services, unfortunately. Right?
So that's not really the viable solution.
It's not, and I mean, like they're. I mean, if we want to talk about viable solutions, we talked about doing this, and I think it's a fun thing. Both of us are avid City Skylines players, and kind of like if you could City Skylines this, what would you do?
Yeah. If I could City Skylines it, I think I would actually do a little bit of what the folks in the video were saying, really focus more heavy attention on public transit in this system. I think with the cap and stitch program, I think that's a necessity for this. Again, nobody wants to see the highway, smell the highway, hear the highway. If we can bury it, that's great. I would absolutely do the cap and stitch program. I would add a lot of community oriented development along that stretch. I would have part of the rail line running through it. I'd have dedicated bus lanes, bike lanes, really make this more of a community amenity in that space. That would definitely be my plan at least. But I play City Skylines on unlimited money and with a lot of mods. So for me, that's easy to say, but I'm not running with the budget.
Right. Fair.
What about you? What would you do? Other than adding gondolas across the whole thing.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, I would also have a pretty transit approach. I would like, I mean, you'd like to see like the full build out of Project Connect, obviously, because like you really just need more. If 80% of the traffic is staying in Austin, like let's give people more efficient ways to get around Austin, because clearly everybody in their own 6,000 square foot or 6,000 pound boxes driving around isn't the most efficient way to do so.
Before too long, there will be 6,000 square foot boxes we're just driving around.
Basically, I mean, some of them around here, geez. That's clearly not the most efficient way. So like some sort of transit solution would be best. But I think I would actually I would like to do a Rethink 35 type solution. I think I would, and we'll put a map up for folks who are not from Austin, but I think I would have 35 essentially like peter out just before the river, coming from the south going north, and turn into like, you still have to bridge over, but the highway would essentially end there and turn into more of like the boulevard type approach that Rethink 35 has. You could build a whole bunch more, housing, apartments, stores, restaurants, whatever, all the way up and down it. If 80% of the traffic is going inside of Austin, those people are only going 35 or 40 miles an hour on I-35 anyway. So travel times might get slightly slower. But if people are seeing that is an option, or they can take a better increased bus service, if you have bus lanes and this sort of stuff on it that could get them there faster, maybe that more efficient solution of moving people around will become faster to do so. And I think, for as far as like traffic that needed to stay on the highway, if they're far south, they can go out 130. And if they go up a little bit further north, they can get off at 71 and take 183. And that loops around as well.
This is where we differ in our desire for I-35, because having driven it a lot, I see a need for at least one extra lane in downtown.
Right.
I don't know that the managed lanes are a necessity, although now we're building these separated managed lanes in South Austin, which these would tie into. But for me, when I am coming in, especially from the north, the highway goes from 4 lanes, 2 above, 2 below, to 3 lanes. Yeah. So there's a huge gridlock right there, because we are squeezing all of this traffic down to 3 lanes when it was 4. Also, this is a primary artery for goods and services from Mexico to Canada. It's literally called
those
the Pan
people
America
100%
Highway.
can take Highway 130.
Oh, no, I agree. But it's such a vital highway link. So we still have to have a highway coming through the region. But because so many trips are going into downtown, I still think we need a highway connection. So my opinion is just 1 lane out, bury it. and improve the area and the space above it.
Mm-hmm.
That's what I would like to see.
I would like that better than what's there now
Yeah.
for sure. But I just think that there's like the through traffic. It's not going to really add any time to go out Highway 130 or even to jog out and around 183. Like, so time is really not that big of a deal. And again, the local traffic will either still use the same road or they will eventually, like as we're building out better public transit, as we're building out better bike lanes, like there are so many more pleasant ways of getting around and especially as the city gets bigger and more dense and there's less parking and all this sort of stuff, like taking the car is going to become a less eloquent solution for people. And like, especially if the city does a good job in providing alternatives that are better. So I think when we kind of talked about doing this episode before, like we need to be thinking about something that's going to work for the next 70 years. And I don't want what's going to work for the next 70 years to be more of the same, which I'd be afraid that like leaving a highway would do. It just like enables the city, the state, everybody to like drag their feet on so many of these other projects because like, it kind of sort of works as is. Let's just like kind of keep doing the same thing and move on. But
one of the things I kind of like about the lowering the grade and putting the caps over is that any further expansion out is going to be almost cost prohibitive. It's going to be way too hard to continue to move out. So if we can essentially lower the highway and cap it, that's the solution. And that's the solution we're going to stick with for probably the next 100 years or more. Maybe in 100 years, people aren't driving as much. And we have trains all throughout Austin or gondolas flying around. We'll see. Yeah,
it's an interesting project though. And it's like happening. It's like happening now. I'll be curious to see if these lawsuits do go anywhere, if the project, as of right now, like, not to be a downer, the project looks like it's going to happen. I hope I'm proved wrong. But
it's definitely happening. Yeah, it's definitely happening. And as we'll talk about in the next episode, it's definitely happening because of the infrastructure bill that just got passed. Texas is using 80%, 90% of the money that it received for highway expansions, and this is right at the top of the list of highway projects that are in backlog. So it's happening. And this is a topic that we're going to continue to talk about over multiple episodes. As you said, we have an e-bike episode coming up.
The next
episode, are going to talk about this as well.
We are, and the next episode is focused on some of these federal infrastructure spending bills, which ties in perfectly because you just mentioned it right there. But speaking of this topic, I did want to point out Rethink 35 does have an event coming up. It'll be just a couple days after this episode is released. So if you're watching this like right when it comes out, Saturday, January 27th at 2 p.m., they're going to be gathering signatures for their petition, and they're going to be over along kind of the area near the hike and bike trail, near where 35 crosses it, which will be closed for quite a while during construction, as a lot of the city will be. It's going to be a little bit of a cluster. We didn't really talk about that, but everyone knows what a highway construction project looks like. Fairly ugly.
And we'll be there. We'll be at the event.
We will be at the event because we're going to be first having a conversation with Kelsey, who is an organizer with Rethink 35. We might talk a little bit about that, but we're really going to be talking about my favorite topic of all time, which is e-bikes. Kelsey has purchased an e-bike in the last couple months when Austin has a great rebate program. We'll probably talk about that too, but excited to chat with her about her new e-bike.
And if you see us out at the event and want to say hi, definitely come up. Say hello to us. We'd love to hear any feedback you have about the show.
Totally.
And speaking of feedback about the show, I think we actually did get a little bit of commentary from folks who have listened so far.
We did. So the first one I want to bring up, it was from @Sparkside217 on YouTube. Thank you, Sparkside. Literally our first YouTube comment. That was not me trying to like juice the algorithm. Thanks for doing this podcast. Austin has a lot of great spots and paths for biking/transit, but has so many opportunities to level up too. Thank you, Sparkside. Very much appreciated. We also had some engagement on TikTok recently.
People are very excited to see my riding of the Wuppertal Schwebebahn.
Yeah, so
I don't know how to say it, but the hanging monorail.
Yeah, so there's a couple on this. I'm just gonna read some names. Dalen H, Luca, R ? Rye, Alex Norris. Lots of folks. Alex Norris had one that I wanted to point out. Apparently on that Wuppertal, not on the Wuppertal, on the monorail, they once put a circus elephant in it to show how strong it was. And then the elephant jumped out into the river. You said you knew about this?
I
and
read about it.
You neglected to mention that when we talked about that?
I
What?
did. I read about it. Apparently the elephant was okay.
Yeah.
Some slight injuries for other people as well. They decided not to try that stunt again.
I can understand why. And then the only other one this was in a message, so I won't read the whole message, but I'll shout out the person's name. We got a message from Danny on TikTok, who said that he listened to the first episode and loved it, and he lives about an hour from Salt Lake City, which in a couple episodes you'll see that was kind of our first like go somewhere else. We're gonna have a couple episodes in Salt Lake City that are gonna be really interesting, and even if you're somebody from Austin listening, I think you'll be interested in the Salt Lake City episodes. And vice versa if we end up getting some folks from Salt Lake City. I mean, we're going to try to keep these conversational and interesting for folks who don't even live in the places that we're talking about. So, but please, it's fun for us to get the comments. We literally are like sending them back and forth. I'm like, shit, people are watching. This is great. So, please leave comments. Let us know what you think. Send us messages. We're interested in your feedback and opinions and thoughts if you've got ideas. We definitely want to hear from you. So,
and please continue to like, subscribe, and share the podcast. You tell your friends, family, bus drivers, everybody you can think of. You can listen to us on pretty much any podcasting platform, or you can watch on YouTube.
Except for SoundCloud, which is a complaint of Jerry's. I don't know if he's the only person I know who uses SoundCloud, so maybe it's not worth it. But
good to know. I'll take the note and see what I can do.
Yeah. Awesome. Thank you all so much for watching, and we will see you next Tuesday for the next Transit Tangents Tuesday.
See you, everybody.
Yeah, I'm saving that dough.